Welcome to the Collective Reset podcast, where we gather to discuss our lives and our passions, self-care, and just how we're handling this worldwide reset, which is what I like to use as a term instead of the word pandemic. I think the word pandemic instills fear. I think the word reset is a nice way of kind of looking at how we're all being forced to sit down and reevaluate life. And so I'm gathering people that I find inspiring and who I think have designed a life that's beautiful and that is fulfilling, and what I hope that people are going to do for themselves in this moment of where do I go now? So if you could share your name and where you're located, please.
My name is Robert Sturman, and I'm located in Santa Monica, California.
And your occupation, Robert, for those who do not know and are meeting you for the first time.
I am a visual artist telling an inspiring, positive story of human beings all over the world in pursuit being better at being human.
Your work is incredible. We talked about this before we started the podcast, but we actually met in 2013 in Miami, Florida, because you were working with who was my boss at the time. I set up a photo shoot between you and my boss at the time because I was in love with your work, and I thought that she, as a doctor, would be a really great subject. And it was great to work with you, and so I'm just like blessed to have you back now all these years later and to be able to talk this time instead of just kind of walk behind you guys.
Thank you for setting that up from maybe 8 years ago. That photograph resurfaced just as kind of an iconic image representing first responders during the pandemic, hospital workers.
Incredible. It's funny how the universe works. So I'm glad we've stayed in each other's orbit. What I love about your work, and for those who don't know you, and I don't want to speak for you, so what is your main subject of what you photograph? I don't want to talk for you.
It's for the last approximately 12 years, my main subject has been the figurative poetry of yoga. It's more like it's a language for me because yoga is so beautiful, the expressive nature of it in the body. As far as from an artistic perspective, it's human beings reaching towards something within their hearts, within themselves, within prayer, contemplation, and in pursuit, in search. And so I've borrowed that language to actually go all over the world and find every type of human being that I can find and create a body of work celebrating equality, diversity, inclusivity, and showing that anyone can do it, from the darkest prisons to the military, to doctors, house painters, firefighters, police officers, you name it.
Mm-hmm. I think what I always found interesting about your work was that your perspective came from someone who also practiced. And for me, who's someone who's been practicing since I was born, but teaching for a very long time now, I talk a lot about yoga off the mat, right? And it not just being something that people are presenting, but that's something that people embody. And I find that your work so embodies a yogi living in service. And I wonder, like, as someone who practices physically and who's doing this work, like what was your own journey with yoga? And then how do you think that influences what you ask of your subjects or what you look for? And I don't know if subjects is the right word, but.
Yeah, no, that's so funny that you say that because it's what they are when in front of the camera, but it does sound very clinical.
Yeah, it does. I'm like, I don't know if that's the right
term. So models, people like being called models because most of the people I work with have never considered themselves a model. Yeah. So subjects, models, whatever. But my journey with yoga began as simply as an idea. I grew up in Los Angeles, so I'd known about yoga
Mhm.
because I think it was very strong here in the late 80s, and then throughout the 90s it just started to grow. But it had this air about it where people that did it embraced life in a way, in a healing manner. And so I was an artist, and I just knew that I wanted to go in a direction of healthy living. And so I'd heard about this thing called yoga, and that it would help you be more present and deal with your problems better and breathe and sit in the discomfort of being alive. And so I tried it. And over the years, I tried it more and more. And it takes a while. I don't think it's the first time that it's something that you build a relationship with. But I found it to be a really positive uh, way to relax and to find a way to be comfortable inside of myself. And so that's how my journey began. And because let me tell you, when I was growing up as an artist, my heroes in the history of art weren't necessarily the best, most self-respecting human beings. A lot of artists that came before me who were brilliant artists didn't know how to manage their creativity and being able to feel so much in life and live lives of self-destruction that often resulted in suicide. Many of my heroes committed suicide, and just relationships that failed. And I wanted to take a different road than that and rewrite the story of what it meant to be an artist and not be broke. And and so I had a few heroes, but not a lot. Marc Chagall was one of my main heroes because there was one quote that he said: "If I create from my mind, nothing will work, and if I create from my heart, everything will work."
Mm.
So but when I started yoga, I looked around and I noticed it was some of the most beautiful figurative poetry I'd ever seen. And as an artist, I could tell a story of what it meant to be human. And it was right there in front of me. If I just took these poses out into nature, on the beach, on rocks, and even in the city, but just showed humanity striving towards excellence.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful story, and it's not a fantasy. It's real. It's what we're doing.
I I think you said two things that really struck me there, and one is the idea that you can follow your passions and not have to suffer for it, right? That you can be an artist and not be the tortured artist. That you don't have to check this box of, if I do this, then this is what comes with it. Which I love that you took stock of, I want to do this without also taking on what has formally come with this.
Yes.
Um, and I think also what you have shown, I think, through your work is how incredibly accessible yoga is, but also how authentic it can be. Um, and and how it and what I've always found so beautiful about it is, I find oftentimes mainstream society paints yoga in this, you have to be in this beautiful studio and you have to be surrounded by, these fabulous things. And I've always told my own students, you can be standing in your closet, right? You can be standing in a parking lot, like, it does not matter.
Right.
And what you've been able to pull out of people in circumstances or situations that for others would say I would never be able to be peaceful there, and you've seen people search for that, I have just found so moving. But we will talk about some of those places in a bit. I also read that your first like comprehensive body of work came after time in Nepal and India. And so I just wanted to, if you could share like what shifted there or what happened there that brought
That's
this
so
out.
great because it's a perfect flow from your last question and what we just talked about, because that was also that was when I was 30 years old. I'm 50 now. I took a trip to India, and it was a really bold move because I didn't know much about it, and I went as an artist, but also as somebody that was interested in spirituality. And so, but when I arrived there, I planned it out so I would stop at a retreat center that was Osho's. And I had always I'd listened to Osho speak a few times, and I always was fascinated with what he talked about, because he had a very strong emphasis on creativity and the arts. And so when I walked into the meditation resort in Pune, India, there was a very large sign, and it was called The Way of the Creator. It was a quote by Osho, and it said, "To be creative means to be in love with life. We can only be creative if we love life enough that it becomes natural to express a poem here, a dance there, a painting there." So when I read that, that was also part of a whole nother level of learning about yoga, and also the missing link from what I was ideologically conditioned to believe an artist needed to do in order to create. Like, create, no pain, no gain. You need to suffer for your work, which I don't believe that at all. And when I read that quote, that was the beginning of rewriting that story of what I just talked about, of saying, no, I'm not going to live a life of self-destruction. No, I'm not going to have failed relationships. No, I'm not going to uh, uh, commit suicide, or whatever it is that all these heroes had done before me. And I realized in that moment that my life was my art, and I needed to make a masterpiece of my own life. And then the work that I would do would be an expression of the life that I was already living. And Osho gave me permission to do that. And that was really the beginning of what I would say the yoga journey and the art journey, the everything journey, is to
That's
just,
incredible. That's so beautiful. It is. It really, you know, when I think about the times that we're sitting in right now and what people are facing in terms of like, how do I move forward and what do I do? And do I follow dreams or a paycheck? And when you talk about, if you create a life that you love, the rest of it follows, right? And I feel like so many people are trying to find the passion first, and then they think the life they love will come after it. And it's like, the happier you are, the more joy you create, the more love you create, the more you're able to wake up and find peace. The rest of that kind of flows from that, right?
yeah. But let me tell you, it didn't just happen overnight.
No, it
I was
certainly doesn't.
an
Yeah.
idiot for a long time. I was, yeah.
I think you have to be an idiot for a while. Like, like I get asked sometimes, like, you seem to have like be very peaceful. I'm like, oh, there were years of no peace. There were years of crazy. There were years of, I think you have to. I think you have to get tired of your own bullshit. Um, and eventually just be like, I'm exhausted. Like, now how do I just make
Yeah.
this like how do I
Drama.
make just this feel good? Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Drama free.
Yeah, absolutely. So you spoke about Osho and that quote. Um, you've also mentioned, and did I cut you off, by the way? Did you have
No,
more?
not at
Okay.
all. No.
You've also spoken about Osho in your relationship to your work being responsible and you wanting to hold on to the responsibility of what you do. And so
Yeah.
what does that mean?
So further on in that journey, that the one I was just speaking of, it was a 2-month journey through India and Nepal. There was I mean, there's many different levels to that question, but let me just embrace one. And that's on that journey, I learned the difference between taking a picture and making a picture. And I had an epiphany, like a deep realization, a heartbreaking realization that, you know, being in an area where there's so many beggars around, asking, just wanting money, wanting a picture, wanting something. There was just real desperation. But it occurred to me that in my process of learning how to say no, because I couldn't help everyone and couldn't make a picture of everyone, but in that process of learning how to say no and do it with love and and have boundaries, I realized that I was a beggar and that I was going around the world and I was a thief, you know. I would take pictures rather than make them, because I wouldn't have the quality, the depth of empathy that I feel was responsible. I might have cared, but there was something that wasn't, it wasn't on a level that was okay for me. Ultimately, my soul was not okay with, I was a liar, a cheater, and a thief. Because I would take, and I would not connect responsibly with the people that I made photographs with. You know, it's all languaging. Took a picture of. I just said I made photographs with. You know, so it's a whole shift in how you connect to the world, how I connected to the world, and it broke my heart when I realized this, because I realized that I wasn't, that I was doing it for me because I wanted good pictures. I wanted to be great at what I did, and that wasn't okay with me, and I cried a lot.
But what a shift.
Yeah, it was very nice.
What a shift, and again, what a tapping into of your practice, right? You know, like we learn terms in yoga and in classes, and terms like ahimsa, right, which means non-harming, and it's like that has to filter into every factor of your life, and that shift was becoming non-harmful, right, to make it about making a picture instead of taking a picture, to do something with instead of.
Yes.
How much of a shift that is. Like, I think when we think about what karma yoga is, and you know, I've done it in the physical sense of sweeping a yoga studio, right, in exchange for, but I think there's also something to be said for my work becomes then in service to you and not in reciprocation of your performance. So again, just moved by how, you know, I think it's so vital when you say you're a yogi to be living what you're saying you're doing. And so that's just really beautiful.
I feel like I could talk to you for days and days, because I just want to ask you questions about you too, because
Yeah.
that was the first time I think I was ever exposed to death doulas in India and Nepal. And I didn't know that that was the name for it, and I don't even know if that's the name for it, but they would sit with the bodies, though, while you know, while they were waiting to be cremated, which could have been years before the family had enough money to do that. but it reminded me when I read about you that that's what you do. You're a birth and death doula, which I find so. I just want to tell you, I'm really honored to be here and just be your guest by somebody that talk about being awake, and so thank you for seeing my work.
Oh, thank you for seeing mine. You know, it came from having two parents. My mother had breast cancer and my father had brain cancer. And so I was a caregiver for both of them and sat with them at their deathbed. And there was a lot you realize in that time. I think there was a lot I realized about the role of caregivers and how unsupported caregivers are. And so my need to not just connect with the person who's passing, but with the family, and specifically the people that are there taking them to appointments and sitting on the phone with doctors. I'm trying to live their life while also caring for someone who's dying. And so I work tightly with families, but also I believe in a grace in transitions. And when it came to birth, it was important for me that women understood how powerful they are, how much of this fear that you have around your pregnancy and birth is created by movies and bad storytelling and doctors who have shifts to work, and how much power we hold in our bodies and in our ancestry. And I found that when you gave women tools to understand the power they already had, that they were able to have really beautiful births, and to no longer continue that story in your own family of that this is terrible and something to be avoided or feared. I also thought of, on the other side of that, the fear surrounding death, which is something we're all going to go through. And so much of it is because of that loss of control. And if you were able to say, this is what I want to do, and not just in the I want to meditate and have incense, but also I want to smoke a joint and I want to watch a comedy and I want to have a glass of bourbon before I go, or I want to write a letter to somebody. I think there's so much that we lose in the sense that you can have control of how you go, and you can do so with grace. And that is your last journey, and you should be a part of that and not at the mercy of it. And so, yeah, I think it's heavy work, but it's good work.
Yeah, how beautiful.
It's good work.
How beautiful.
When I've seen some of your pictures, I am like just blown away of not only the images that you're taking, but what it must feel like to be in those spaces, and to be with your models, and what you must exchange from them in both like conversation and energy, and what you must walk away from these places. I would assume it changes not just like it changes your mind about things and your perception and a lot. So one of them I'd like to touch on, if you could tell me like something memorable or share with us something you took away from these different projects that I've seen you work on. And one of them is your in Kenya with your African yoga project.
Mm-hmm.
What that was like and what you gained from that, or
That was
lost from that.
right. That was I just know that it was a very homogenous
Mm.
yoga in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think it was starting to diversify a little, but for the most part, it was predominantly blonde-haired, blue-eyed women that were featured as yoga people. And then I think I had already worked in prison a little bit, but I saw something on the internet about Africa Yoga Project, and I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I didn't see the greatest pictures, but immediately when I saw just in the shanty towns, and I mean, it was just so cool.
Yeah.
And I knew immediately I just wanted to go there, and because it was awesome. And so I contacted them because I felt like they needed great pictures in order to really spread their message, because pictures change everything. And so I wanted to volunteer for them, and within like 2 months I was on a plane to Kenya. And so many things happened. I mean, one great thing that I was thinking about it earlier is I went and photographed in a prison there, a women's prison. And when I walked in through all the security and everything, I walked into where the class was, and they were preparing lunch, and a lot of them had these big knives. And, you know, I mean,
You're like,
right, not that there's any reason to hurt me or anything, but I was taken aback, because you won't see
wouldn't happen
something like
here.
that in San Quentin, you know?
Yeah.
So I just walked and let that go, and was able to be with the women, and they were all gosh, to this day, I mean, that was 8 years ago, and I'm still so moved by them. They were all living with the HIV virus. And they were in prison for, I don't know why, maybe for them, in my mind, they all, whatever they did, who knows, maybe most of them, it was self-defense, or who knows why they were there. But I was very moved by that, and that was an incredible experience, to just surrender and be with them, and realize that, you know, it's not about me, back to taking the pictures. It's really, the camera is just an excuse to be somewhere, to be present, to be interested, like you're interested in, you asked me to be on your podcast. You know, the root of that is you're interested in me, and I thank you for that. So it's because these women aren't going to see the photographs in my camera or on Facebook or Instagram. It's the moment that we had together of sharing our humanity, of paying attention, of acknowledging that they exist and that they're worthy of being seen. And it's a beautiful thing.
It really is. And it's, you know, as a photographer, when you think about who is then viewing your work, I wonder if, like, sometimes you realize how meaningful it is, like, coming as a Black yogi. And, you know, I was lucky enough that I spent most of my childhood and adulthood also in Yogaville, which is an ashram in Virginia, and was founded by Swami Satchidananda, so an Indian man. And so Yogaville was always flooded with Indians. And so there was a real understanding of yoga had started there, and was brown people. And it wasn't until I almost got older and realized how much of the framework in the West is blonde, blue-eyed. And as I got older, and especially began teaching, how it messes with your head that you never see yourself doing this. And I think the beauty of, you know, technology, specifically things like Instagram, for all of its things that go wrong, it's allowed Black people, especially, I'm turning 40 on Monday. So when I think of younger Black yogis than me that are coming up, that they're able to see all of these amazing men and women who practice, right? But when I saw your work, it was like, to know that there were Black people in Africa doing yoga made me happier than you could have imagined.
Oh, that's so cool.
It was like, it was, because even for me knowing about Indians, it was still India, right? And so that is a different group of people. And to have a connection to my own people, and to say, oh, they were doing this, and they were clearly doing this before the camera came, and that this is a part of their life. You sharing that was huge. So thank you for that. Another project. Sorry, go
Wait,
ahead.
let me go with one more story from Africa, okay?
Yeah.
So after I'd worked at a lot of children's homes and also in the villages, I wanted to go to Mount Kilimanjaro to photograph the Maasai warriors
Oh, I
that
love
practice.
them.
Right. And this is, I think when I was younger, I had a dream of being maybe a National Geographic photographer. And it just seems that's like a big,
Yeah.
just one of the things that crossed my mind as I developed as a photographer. And so this was truly a National Geographic moment to go. So they had this one gentleman named Jacob in Nairobi was my guide to Maasai country, where he was a Maasai warrior. So he took me through. But right when I saw him, I met him. Like I immediately said, there's my model right there.
Oh.
But he was just, in his mind, he was just my guide, and he was going to take me to go to the tribes, and which was cool and all. But I just, he was beautiful. There was something about him. I knew he was the one. So, and I lightly told him about it, and there was definitely a language gap, and he wasn't going to have it. He just said no, no, because he never saw himself
As
as
that.
one of those people in those fancy photographs by this fancy photographer. You know what I mean? But that's my guy right there. So it took about 3 days, and I photographed, a few. Yeah, we went to some villages and I did some work, but it took maybe 2 or 3 days of me convincing. But I finally got him, and
That must have taken a bit.
right. He didn't know, like, because he could never see himself. But then immediately when I was able to show him in the camera how
Mm.
beautiful he looked, how strong, powerful, and
Mm.
warrior-like he looked, he lit up.
Yeah.
And that was what, 8 years ago? It's his Facebook banner to this day.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so cool. That's very cool. I also really love that tribe. I studied them in the third grade
Right. It's like
and
you
still
study,
remember them.
right.
Incredible. I'm hoping to go to Africa. I told you it's June, so I will be reaching out to you for some
Okay.
tips
Yeah.
where to go. But your work with war veterans, what has that brought to you? And I don't want to speak for why they've been practicing yoga, but how have you had conversations about how yoga has helped them or why they're practicing or
Oh yeah. Many,
Mhm.
many. Yeah. Um, I mean, imagine killing people, seeing people killed, losing your best friend, losing your legs. I mean, someone gives me a dirty look and I'm traumatized. You know,
It's true. Yeah.
it's just so I can't even imagine that. So,
Hmm.
and they don't have the tools to be able to process the trauma of that's existence times infinity, like the traumas that a human being's supposed to normally on the normal level of trauma. So I really noticed that the individuals that I worked with that had fallen in love with the practice had been able to rewrite their story, process those emotions, and move forward in a very healthy way.
Hmm.
And so it that really inspired me to continue. There's like an energy, a flow that kept building where veterans would find me and ask me to tell their story,
Hmm.
and I'd find them as well. And that's when I truly realized that photographs have the potential to change the world, because it's okay. Here we go. I want to show want to show a side of life, a reality, not a fantasy, that there are veterans that are healing through this practice of yoga and meditation. And I want to celebrate that and bring it into people's their minds so that it starts to become very normal.
Yes.
Like the same with the prison. Like, of course, people in prison are practicing yoga. What else would they be doing in prison? That's what you do when you go to prison, right? And so that's what my goal was. All these real humanitarian efforts, and especially with people who've had to deal with the horrors of war.
I feel like your permissions give people of that community, your photographs give people in that community permission to heal, right? Is how I've seen it as an outsider, is like, if you are a war veteran sitting at home going through this, thinking that you have to approach things this way, or thinking that you have to be tough, or that other veterans aren't approaching it from a different way, when you see this mirror, I think it allows you to say, like, oh, well, that guy did yoga and meditated, so I can do yoga and meditate.
Yes.
And okay, I don't have to sit and in pain. I'm allowed to heal from this. Like, that's, I think there's a great permission given to people to recognize, like, you're allowed to move through this and to access all and every tools to get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the poster child for this, just one of the most moving pictures I've ever made of a veteran was a veteran who fought in Iraq and lost his legs. His name's Dan Nevins. And we did some beautiful work together. And one of the things that he said is, invite a veteran to yoga, you might just save a life. And to have someone like that as the spokesperson, they're telling their stories. It's just, and I get to just be a vehicle for that.
Talk about San Quentin Prison, which my favorite work of yours has been San Quentin Prison.
To me, it's fascinating. Never in a million years would same with working with people in the military. When I was in art school or growing up, never in a million years would I ever think that I would end up working so closely with the military or people in prison. But San Quentin was just, look, I had been fascinated with like prison documentaries and prison shows. And then when I ended up being asked to go there to do a body of work, it was, I was pretty excited. But also it's just, it's freaky too. And the first time I went, the lieutenant, when I was growing up, we had a guy, a serial killer. When I was around 14, 1984, that was all around LA. It was called the Night Stalker.
Ooh. Is it bad that I like smile when I watch crime stuff all the time? I'm like, don't smile when you say serial killer, but very interested.
It's amazing how fascinated we are with it. So when he terrified the city, lock your doors, and it was the middle of summer, and everyone was hot, but you had to lock your windows and lock your doors because he was on a tear. So when I first went, the lieutenant, he took me on a little tour, and I think he knew I was from Los Angeles, so he was trying to freak me out a little bit, and he said, you see that building up there? That's called the Adjustment Clinic, and I think that's what they call death row. And there was a light on in the corner, and he said, you see that light? He said, have you heard of a guy named Richard Ramirez? And that's who the Night Stalker was. And I just got chills. So that was my first experience there. And I was deeply fascinated with it, but I mean, beyond that, connecting with these guys has been so cool because I really have met some of the kindest, like, you know, people that have developed that kind of honey, like, you know, I know you know Ram Dass because of your profession. So that kind of sweet honey, that bodhisattva, that, so I met mostly African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And just people that have done their work, like really, really done their work. Amazing people. This one gentleman named Mo Washington, who had, when he was, I guess, 18 or 19, he was involved with gangs and he murdered somebody. And now I think he's 50 something years old and just, I mean, so advanced, so devoted to his practice, but the advanced is in the how he speaks, you know, the, and I've over the years just been so inspired because I meet a lot of people in the yoga industry and and there's a lot of male yoga teachers who are not very responsible human beings. And so it's just been deeply refreshing and inspiring, the humanity I've witnessed behind bars.
Isn't that amazing? The humanity, like what people would not expect, right?
Right.
Because we've painted this idea that people in jail are animals and that people in prisons are, that they don't know right from wrong, or that these aren't whole people. And so many of them are in there for infractions. And even those who are in there for major things are doing the work.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought your pictures show such a beautiful side to them. I think to show Black men softer than we expect them to be. Um, I think to show men in prison and what should be a space that crushes you, but looking to find some light in their tunnel. Um, it's
Yeah.
just amazing. How does the yoga work in prison? Do they have classes, or is this like a totally individual?
No, there's an organization called the Prison Yoga Project that first started going into San Quentin quite a few years ago, James Fox. And he started that program there. And since then it's expanded, you know, all over the country and starting in Mexico and in Europe now. And it's inspired a lot of other people that aren't affiliated with Prison Yoga Project to start their own projects and volunteer to bring prison into to the prisons near where they live. And that was another thing where I knew that it was going to take powerful photographs to let the flame spread and
Mm-hmm.
to really show the reality, not a fantasy, that this is really happening in our world. There's
Mm-hmm.
great things happening in our world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I wanted to focus on by photographing in prisons and show the good that's going on, because all those documentaries that I was just talking about, all I saw was just stuff that
Mm-hmm.
was horrible. Like, you know, like I'm going, yeah, of course they're going to kill me, because that's all I know, is
Mm-hmm.
all I've seen is that there's just violence, there are animals, but there's great things going on. And San Quentin's a, an incredible prison because there's so much education and people volunteering to help.
We need more of that. I mean, if we talk in this time specifically, right, about defunding police and defunding prisons, and if you think about like what that veteran said to you of like save a life by bringing a veteran to a yoga class, right? When we
Yeah,
think about what prisons are, what we would hope prisons are supposed to be, which is that people are coming out better than apparently they went in. which we
Right.
know is not what happens. But if the money, if the effort was put towards teaching every prisoner yoga and teaching them how to meditate and self-soothe and how to
Yeah.
work their way through the trauma they're going through while in there and how to come out better and different or lighter, right? um, what you're also giving to the world by doing that. It's like, we have to, you got to inject beauty before things fall apart at the beginning.
Yes.
I love it. It does make me want to get involved in it. When we were talking about going to Africa, I was like, I'd like to work in different, I think your work reminds me often of why we're supposed to be teaching yoga, and it wasn't just to teach wealthy white girls with blonde hair in nice studios, and what the work is supposed to be bringing out of people. Um, so when, so I told you that when I reached out to you before that I had Nina Simone is one of my favorites. So Nina Simone was my mother's favorite. She's my favorite. I just recently rewatched her documentary, and so this was happening through our first civil rights revolution when the documentary's filmed. And she talks about, as a creative, that is the time where you either feel drawn towards filling your own creative juices by tapping into the people you find inspiring, or that it's this time of having to kind of purge whatever the revolution is bringing out in you. So I wonder, as an artist, what are you feeling like? Are you feeling like you're being pulled towards others' art to fill your own like creative well? Or are you feeling like there's work that you're needing to do or put out in this time of revolution? Like, how is it impacting you as a creative?
Are we talking about the revolution of the
Yes.
civil rights movement?
Yes. Talking about the civil rights movement.
I just feel like it's a privilege to be here right now with an opportunity to support this, because when I was an apprentice to a master photographer when I was 19 years old, he showed me a lot of his work from his entire life, and a big part of what he did was a portfolio he created in the South during the civil rights movement, and where he was following Dr. King. And out of all his photographs, those really, really moved me. And I lived in Memphis for a while. And I knew that it's like saying in South Africa that apartheid's finished. It's ridiculous. So when I saw that it was something that was somewhere else from another time, and it was something that, like, as a photographer, I looked at it with like greatness, like, wow, he got to do that and be a part of that. So when this happened here in the United States, that really surfaced and gave us, like, just, I mean, you have to be blind not to just, I mean, I live in Los Angeles, so I just can walk out my front door and just in any direction and find this massive uprising, which was amazing. And I'm a little concerned that it doesn't keep the momentum, or it doesn't get turned into something very positive and productive. But when I saw that, I knew immediately that it was just a privilege to be able to turn my attention to that. And it was a little awkward the first moment, like all of a sudden my page went from these just yogic centric imagery to humanity, all colors, just raising their fists for human rights.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing has ever felt more important to me
Mm-hmm.
than turning my camera towards that. And I wish that I did more. But I'm an independent artist, and I just I did what I did, and hopefully I'm ready for the next time. It threw me a curveball. I didn't have a press pass yet, and I didn't know how to be in those situations yet. So I had to learn very quickly. And I watched a lot of documentaries immediately on how to be a war photographer and all those things that I had always had thought about becoming but never pursued, and always was an independent artist. But I but I really, this was important enough to just start going for it.
I thought they were so raw. I think that two things you just said just struck me. One being just go for it. Like, I feel like so many people do the, like, I have to wait until I have this. I have to wait until I have this. And it's like the world sometimes just presents you with, get out there and just start doing it.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing you said of just being present and just witnessing what was happening, I think that shows up so much in your work of just like bearing witness to what's happening.
Right. But it also showed me that it was also an opportunity to be much more responsible with my work, because I knew that there was a little problem with my prison photograph. Like, why are there so many black men in my photographs? It's not just because I connected with them more because we just connected, because there were, there's white people and Latino people, but predominantly in my work, it would be African Americans. And it gave me an opportunity to, like, oh, no more elephant, like, okay. So to really educate myself and study the film 13 and read the new Jim Crow and develop, I'd always wanted to, and I figured that Prison Yoga Project we would go in that direction, but it wasn't, for me, it wasn't quick enough with my work. I needed to take responsibility and start educating myself and inspiring other people to become educated on what the hell is going on with mass incarceration. And I was irresponsible before because I wasn't embracing that. I knew it was there, but I didn't know how to talk about it. So this gave me a kick in the ass to really embrace that.
But I think it's like everyone right now, it's like learning and unlearning, right? And it's the willingness to do so that is making a difference. But it is a lot of just unlearning things. I think it's also and I don't want to speak for you, but it's like if what's there is what's there, then that's what you shoot. But why is it there, right? Why are there so many there? And I do think that documentary 13, for those who haven't seen it, need to watch it. The new Jim Crow, need to read it. Yeah. It is important. Whenever people ask me about like what should I be donating to, I always say bail funds. Like, get people out of jail. Just, it's a terrible system.
Right. Terrible.
It's a terrible system. What it started as, what it is now, what it continues to be, it's horrendous.
Yeah, and how it trickles down into just like having no men in the community.
Absolutely.
I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. I read an article the other day. There's a gentleman, and I don't know his name right now, but he just was released after he was in jail for 27 years for having $30 worth of weed on him. And you're like, this is who is sitting in jail. Bad lawyer, couldn't afford bail.
Yeah.
So he sat there for $30 worth of weed,
and also
pleaded
guilty for things that he probably didn't do just because he thought he could get out of there.
Because they told him that he would. If there's anything that you learn from Central Park 5, right, which is for those who don't know, was about the Central Park Five rape,
Which is the same
which is
director,
this,
Ava.
say, Ava DuVernay, who I love,
Yeah.
and she puts out amazing work. And Central Park Five, if you know, I grew up in New York, so I remember the story, but I was young when I watched her documentary and realized that one of those gentlemen was just along for the car ride and was just went with his friend to the station, and then he's the one that went to Rikers Island, and he's the one that was tried as an adult, and he's the one that sat in jail the longest. And you're like, simply because he didn't know how to answer the questions correctly, didn't have a good lawyer, and didn't have the money to get out, wasn't even around them.
Right.
You know, it's like, and this is what happens. And there's people have been duped into thinking that the prison system rectifies or does what you think it does. It does not. It's modern day slavery, and it's all it's ever been. It's all it's ever been. To move on to something else is, I always like, for what I hope for, and we mentioned this in the beginning, is that for people who are watching this, they are looking at people who are inspiring, who are doing something that moves them and that serves others, and that they are figuring out that there's more than one way to live their life, perhaps. And I know that I loved what I read that your father said to you when he got you your first camera, was to shoot what you love. Is that correct? And so I wonder, when people start sitting at a crossroads right now, or looking for which direction to go, or looking to start over, and everyone's scared, is, as somebody who's on their own, who started out and is kind of figuring things out. I mean, you're at an incredible level in your artistry, but are also learning as you continue. What your advice would be for somebody who's like, I know I need to do something different, but I don't know what, or how do I do this?
Yeah, the reset, as you so eloquently coined it, which is true. I think it gave us the opportunity to also ask ourselves what's really important. And, you know, obviously making a living is very important too. So it can't just be do what you love and the money will follow. There has to be a little bit of, I feel that philosophy never worked for me.
No, it doesn't work for me either. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a wonderful book, just to interrupt, called The Yoga of Money. And I love that book because it talks about, you do not have to suffer and be broke, right?
Yeah.
You have to figure that part out too, and it's important. Yeah.
So I would just, for me, it's just what's important, you know, what's important. Like, for instance, once the pandemic occurred, my social life was completely cut off. My work was cut off, and it was just pretty much just me and my dog. And it hasn't been a problem. It's what happened is I realized that there's just so much noise out there and so much confusion. And what this gave me an opportunity to do was really like tighten up my life and create a space. My parents are 83 years old, and my dad has been on the edge of the possibility of leaving for 2-3 years now. He had lung cancer. And so this pandemic really, really was massively like traumatizing to them, and so much fear. So, but I'm the only one in the area that has an outside space. So I was able to create a space so that my parents could come and hang out in the sun and relax And so my main responsibility became to, even though they could live 10, 15 years, but
Be a
to
caregiver.
put it into doula with them,
Yes, absolutely.
which there's no greater honor and there's nothing more important. So that's just one thing that I learned. And that's not going to bring me any money. Obviously, you have to use your mind to make a living, but to just figure out what's important and just do that. That's it.
It is. I think it is like so vital right now is to figure out what's important to you and then do more of it. Figure out what feels good and do more of it.
Yeah. And
Thank
this
you for
showed us
sharing.
that there's just so much BS, you know. Gosh,
There is so much noise. It is what you said, so much noise. And this I think has forced us to quiet some of that chatter, right? And now I think we've like quieted the external chatter and now it's like sitting with the internal chatter and figuring our way through that, which I think for most of us is the hardest part. Um, but yeah, if you can figure out what is lighting you up, even if it's one thing right now, just do more of it. Feed it,
nourish.
nourish it. Yeah. So, Mr. Sturman, how can people find you? So when they want to see your work and read about your travels whenever we're able to travel and learn more about you, where can they find you on the interwebs?
I think right now Instagram is a good place to see a daily offering of just what's happening, just artwork that's an expression that's unfolding.
And your handle is?
Robert Sturman. And also my website, robertsturmanstudio.com. Just to Google my name, it's easy enough these days.
Yeah, you'll find him everywhere. I just want to thank you again. It really, I know I've said it before, but such a long-time fan. And honestly, more than being a fan, because that sounds a little nutty, is I honestly just admire you and your work, and your vision and your passion behind it, and what it has brought out in me as just an observer and a viewer. And I know for so many other people, every time I show someone a picture of yours, they're like, oh my God, because it really is just phenomenal. And I thank you for sitting with me and our audience and joining us and hopefully helping people through this reset.
Thank you. Well, like I said, the honor is mutual. Your life is exquisite and inspiring.
Thank
The
you.
dinner table.
Yes, the dinner table. Yes,
I'm
yes,
going to
yes.
tell friends about the dinner table. It's a
Oh,
brilliant idea.
please do. The dinner table, for people who are watching who don't know, is a nonprofit for people in their 20s and 30s. We also take people in their early 40s, probably because I'm on staff and now I'm turning 40 and I'm like, but it's for people who have suffered significant loss. And when we were in physical spaces, we have over 1,000 tables and people throughout the world who meet together over dinners and discuss and support each other. And now we have these amazing online spaces, and we do for homicide loss and sibling and cancer and so many others, and spaces now for people of color. And it's just been really amazing to watch the world come together in this way. And at this point, everyone's dealing with loss. There isn't somebody that's not touched by it in some form or another. Grief is collective at this point. Um, and so I feel like we're all just kind of walking each other through it. And so thank you for walking through some of our folks here.
Thank you.
Namaste to you, Robert.
Namaste. Iana.
Yeah.